as that velocity is slowing down, we have to give our bodies some time to recruit more of those motor units and recruit more of the actin and myosin fibers. I had mentioned that the arms will be the hypotenuse of the triangle. What's going on, everybody? It's Hopper again. We got Brutus, we got the Ultimate Warrior. Let's get it started. Today's video will be 3 ways to improve the deadlift. Now, as usual, before we move forward with this topic, we need to define a few terms.
Okay.
When we discuss deadlifting, we will not talk anything about moving more weight. What we want to do with the deadlift is to improve the technique of how we do it. If I were to give someone tips on how to just lift more weight, it would basically impede on the ability of our body to break down the tissues, overload our tissues the way that we actually could. So this topic will give us better ways to generate the overload, to break our body down, to stress ourselves out for the deadlift, and not necessarily just to move more weight. It's very easy to just move weight on the deadlift and get super close to the bar and lift with the lower back, and that's just not our objective. What we want to do here is we want to overload the proximal ends of the hamstrings, all the glute tissues with the deadlift, as well as expose the back to enormous amounts of isometric tension while we do this lift. This lift is phenomenal for general strength, bone density, glute and hamstring development.
Anyway, yeah, about my
Core training, tension on the trapezius, isometric tension on the lats, the rhomboids.
You have your ubulus muscle that connects to the upper dorsimus. It's boring, but it's part of my life.
It's a phenomenal movement. So with the deadlift, the very first thing that we want to focus on is we have to be in front of the bar. Shoulders need to be in front of the bar, and it looks like this. So if we have our XY graph, per usual, right here, and if our little stick figure is looking this direction and we're here, and the weight is actually right here, and we have the weight, if this person were to approach the bar and this is the person's head right here, I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit on the drawing, but we want this person's shoulders 10 degrees right here in front of that bar. Another good reference point is to have the crease of the arm right by the armpit, right over the bar. The most important thing that we want to look for when we're deadlifting is to have that barbell underneath the shoulder blade, because if not, that barbell will not ascend. The barbell needs to be underneath the scapula in order for us to generate that pull. And if you look closely, you'll see this triangle, and this shoulder, the arm will always represent the hypotenuse of that triangle. And so as we're approaching the bar, we always want to ensure that when we squat down, that the shoulders are slightly 10 degrees in front. The crease of the arm is right underneath the barbell, and that'll make for an extremely efficient pull. So that's the very first tip: stay in front of the barbell. Way too many times I'll see when people try to deadlift, the shoulders are actually above the bar. We always want to ensure that we are 10 degrees in front of that bar, so that way the barbell is underneath the scapula, and when we start to pull, the force transfer will be efficient and strong. So that's the very first tip. Okay, tip number 2. Let's go back to the stick figure. Here. Here's the foot. There's the tib fib, that's the femur, there's the shoulder. When we have the barbell right here, that's the bar coming through, here's the plate. We want to focus on 3 different reference points. We want the shoulder, the hip, and the barbell all to raise at the same time, simultaneously. If the barbell happens to be too heavy, the hip will generally shoot up too soon, and the barbell will have an initial bout of acceleration, and then the barbell will slow down on the way up if someone pulls with the hip ascending too soon. Now, if someone's goal or objective is to lift as much weight as possible successfully and get the hips to lock in, that's fine, so be it. Again, if the hip has a tendency to shoot up too high, then the hamstrings right here, we start to lose tension, especially that proximal end of the hamstring. And by that proximal end of the hamstring, Bruce is going to show us his booty right here. By the proximal end of the hamstring, right here by this ischial tuberosity and the obturator foramen, these are the parts of the hamstrings that we really want to overload. Because when we create that hip extension, creating that hip extension is specific to a vertical jump, the way we walk, the way we run, and to get that proximal end of the hamstring to fire adequately. So hip, shoulder, and barbell always ascending simultaneously. That is a critical reference point. It'll usually take some time to get the feel for the hip, the shoulder, and the barbell to ascend together. But after a while, after enough practice, and do not use a mirror when you do this, just focus on getting a feel for the movement, you'll start to feel all three units ascend together. And that's definitely what we want. Tip number 3. Before we discuss this third tip, we need to cover the force velocity curve. So we have force and we have velocity. If we have our curve right here, the slower that we travel, the more force that we're going to generate. The less force that we generate, the faster that we're going to travel. Over here in the velocity, meters per second, we will have the actin and myosin fibers. When they contract, if there's your actin, there's your myosin, and here's another one. If we are moving at higher rates, our body just simply won't have enough time to acquire all the actin and myosin fibers bridging together to help generate that movement. Although faster movements are critical for sports and for life in general, to train at the velocity end of the spectrum certainly has its benefits. However, what it doesn't have is the ability to generate bone density, as well as the motor unit recruitment. On the force side, as we start to slow things down and the loads get heavier and heavier, that's going to be a much better way to help generate bone density and to increase that motor unit recruitment. I have another video about motor unit recruitment. I'll put a tag for it right here. As the loads get heavier for the deadlifts, the velocity will decrease significantly. So if we go from 135 pounds to 225, close to 250, as we're starting to slow down, we can generate more force as that motor unit recruitment starts to increase, and then we will also have more actin and myosin bindings. We will have more time for the tissue to grab and slide past each other, and that's what we're going to want when we focus on the deadlift. When we set up for the deadlift at a heavier weight, and again, the weight is going to be relative to the individual, as we set up for that, we need to, what I call, embrace the delay. It's similar to the movie Top Gun and the opening scenes where the jets are firing their engines and they haven't quite taken off yet. I love that movie. So does Brutus. Brutus is a big Top Gun fan. So when we set up for that deadlift and we start to squeeze, just because we feel as if that the weight is moving slower, the velocity is slower on the weight, doesn't mean it's incorrect. That's actually what we want. As that velocity is slowing down, we have to give our bodies some time to recruit more of those motor units and recruit more of the actin and myosin fibers to bind together so we can generate that lift. And again, back to the idea of the hip and the shoulder and the barbell ascending together, that's not going to happen if we try to move at faster velocities on the lift, especially if the load is heavier. So embrace that delay. There usually be about a 1 to maybe a 3 second delay depending on how heavy the load is based off of your relative strength with that deadlift. And always ensure that that hip and that shoulder ascend together as we move higher and higher on the force end of this spectrum right here with this force velocity curve. So the next portion will be in the training studio. We'll discuss the deadlift with the barbell and we'll be all set. Okay, let's get started. 3 tips on how to improve the deadlift. There are several different ways that we can set the feet up. I typically like what I call a squat stance or an athletic style stance, where it's nowhere near as wide as a sumo, but it is a little bit wider so that way I can put my hands between the knees right here, and it's going to hit the glutes a little bit harder. And it's more specific to an athletic style stance rather than if we deadlift with the feet straight, which of course is specific to the power clean, the snatch, etc. So both of those have their benefit. So for this drill, I will start off with my feet just a little wider in a squat stance. First tip that we discussed, shoulders 10 degrees in front of the bar. As I sit back, I had mentioned that the arms will be the hypotenuse of the triangle. If we were to draw an imaginary line from the bar all the way up to the ceiling, that's the other portion of the triangle. And now you can see right about here, the shoulders are 10 degrees in front, and now I have my hypotenuse. All too often, I see people when they go to deadlift, the shoulders are in line with the bar and the force transfer is terrible. The barbell will usually drift out just like that. We want to always ensure that the barbell drives straight up. So again, right here, shoulders 10 degrees in front and or the barbell is directly underneath the crease of the arm right here. 10 degrees. You'll see the triangle right there. Okay, tip number 2, hip, shoulder, and barbell ascend simultaneously. This part is critical. This part is specific towards the way that we run, the way that we jump, the way that we walk. If you're a wrestler, the way that we hip in. We got to use the glutes. We got to make sure that the proximal of the hamstring functions adequately. If you're a football player,
Patowski, that's one brother.
Driving into someone, making sure the hip and the shoulder ascend together. We don't want the hip to just drive up like this. That'll make the barbell initially accelerate. And then we move into a really slow pull, and a lot of times you'll see people shaking like this as they stand up. So here, I maintain my 10-degree angle. On the start, you'll see the hypotenuse of the triangle. I start to squeeze and my glutes, the hip, the shoulder, the barbell ascend together as one unit. Pulling one more time, squeezing, hip, shoulder, hip. And down. Now for the third and final tip, we need to embrace the delay. As we discussed on the force velocity curve, if we move too fast, then the actin and myosin fibers won't have enough time to grab onto each other and create that muscular contraction. Plus, we won't be able to generate all that motor unit recruitment that we also discussed on the whiteboard section. As we set up, we need to embrace that delay as we're squeezing and not metaphorically get ahead of ourselves and try to lift that weight. Just because the barbell is moving slower, because there's more weight, doesn't mean it's wrong. That's actually correct. So we're here, we set up, shoulders 10 degrees in front, hip, shoulder will ascend together. I start to squeeze. Notice I'm squeezing my tissues. The barbell doesn't immediately ascend up. My shoulders are down, shoulders are 10 degrees in front. I focus on hip and shoulder ascending together, and I embrace the delay. Squeezing, 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 and now we've got it. Hips in and down. One more time. I avoid the rush. If there's any point in time that we hear the barbell jolt and make a noise like this, and it jolts up, that's usually a sign that the hip is driving up too soon. It becomes a quad dominant movement, and then we remove adequate amounts of tension on the glutes and the hamstrings. So here, shoulders in front, hip and shoulder ascend together, squeeze, squeeze, embrace the delay, hips in. So that's it for this video. 3 tips on how to improve the deadlift. Shoulders 10 degrees in front of the bar, hip and shoulder ascend together, and embrace the delay as we move into the heavier loads. For those of you that wish to support this channel, there's a link below to donate. At the very least, please like this video. Yes, yes. And subscribe for more content. Comment below, share this content as well, and we will see you all next time.